All right. Hello, everybody. My name is David Perry. I am a university lecturer. I teach at Indiana University at their downtown campus. I teach character design, 2D animation, both intro and advanced. And then starting next semester, also be teaching comics. I'm taking that over from a professor who'd been doing it for years. And then what's actually funny about that is I'll be teaching intro next semester, and then immediately the following semester will be switching back. So he'll be teaching intro, and I'll be teaching the advanced version of it. So but that's what I do at Indiana University. And on top of that, I'm also the illustrator for On Nuts, which is a middle grade graphic novel created by Max Beaudry. He and I have been working for years and years, and I'm mostly here to talk about my relationship with them, how long it's been going on, kind of how it started, and what it means to be in a relationship like that, and how to sort of navigate it. And so I'm going to start with some other things first. I have kind of an idea for how this is going to go, because I'm imagining there's probably students or students watching or people who are interested in being illustrators, specifically for this particular video, who are interested in getting into comics and how all that functions. So I'm going to start with how to get found. So a lot of this is stuff I do talk to my students about when they're doing their finals. I do all these other different lectures that are unrelated, not entirely unrelated, but unrelated to like the craft of illustration or character design or whatever it is. So because they're not doing anything other than working on their finals. So for those particular lectures, there's usually about three or four of them. I talk about things that I know that I wish I had learned or been taught about the industry and about all the sort of the tertiary things that are harder to find. Like if you wanted to learn how to draw, you could find countless fantastic tutorials and YouTube channels and things like that that could teach you everything you need to know. But if you're going to college, there are things that are harder to find because it's sort of like the unknown unknowns. You don't even know like where to, like what questions to ask or where to go. So I usually kind of cover those kinds of topics. So the first thing I'm going to talk about, like I said, is how to get found. The biggest and most important thing is getting your work out there. And this is an issue that I know I've had with my students, and when we talk about this, because I do kind of a Socratic method, open format kind of class, so we talk about stuff a lot. And it's always like sort of this nervousness about getting their work out there because if they don't feel like it's good enough, and sometimes they're right, sometimes it's not good enough, but they're afraid that it's going to put off any recruiters or anything that might be looking, any people who are interested. And that's just not the case because what happens, for one thing, it's a lot of effort on their part to remember your name if your work is bad. So usually what happens is if the work's not good, they pass it. They don't even remember who you are. And so, but you keep posting those things and make it like post everything you can as often as you can. And then when the work starts to get better and better and better, that's when they start stopping on your work. If it's bad, they just scroll right past it. But if it's good, that's when they start stopping on it and they'll save like your name and things like that. So one of the things I tell them about is the way that recruiting tends to be done if you want to get like, because I teach animation as well. That's where Max and I are. So Max works professionally in the animation industry. I work sort of secondary to it. I teach animation and things like that. And I work with people in the industry on their animated series concepts, pitch materials, and that kind of stuff. That's what I specialize in. Um, but so when I'm talking to them, I'll tell them, when recruiters are looking for artists or illustrators or animators or storyboard artists, whatever it happens to be, when they're looking for those people, their first line, their first, well, there's three, right? So the first thing they look for is, well, do we already know somebody in the industry that's worked at the studio or that we know can do this work and we know how they work in the environment, right? We're already familiar with these people, so we might as well tap that well first. So that's the first thing that they do. The second thing that they do, and this is where students get a little mixed up, it's like they're not looking, unfortunately, they're not looking at the resumes that get turned in through, their website or through their job boards or through LinkedIn. It doesn't matter what it is. If it's involved with an application, that's not what they're looking at. That's their third thing. Their second thing though is recruiters and people like that are looking for artists. They do what everybody else does, and they just mindlessly scroll through social media, through Instagram, through LinkedIn sometimes, but mostly places where artists tend to gather, and then they'll stop on artists whose work looks good to them, who they know they might actually be able to tap as a resource later on, and they'll save those portfolios or those Instagram accounts or whatever they happen to be. And that's the next group of people they look for, people that they know that the art is good at least, right? That they know what they're doing as far as the craft is concerned. The last place they go is what applications were turned in. Maybe we can go to LinkedIn and see who was applying to those jobs, that kind of stuff. And it makes sense when you think about it because those are the people that they don't know anything about those people. They'd have to click on a link or whatever to go to the portfolio just to find out if the art's good. And even if the portfolio is really good, they still don't know how that person works in a professional environment. Do they know the industry at all? Do they know how to work with other people very well at all? Are they personable? Do they fit? Will they fit in sort of the culture of the studio that we have? Like all that those kinds of questions. So that's the step. That's sort of like the first place they go to look for employees, second place and third place. And so what you need to do in order to make sure that you have an opportunity in that second category is you need to get your work out there, make it ubiquitous, make it unavoidable, post it absolutely everywhere. That's what I do. I am all over every social media website you can possibly imagine. LinkedIn has been the biggest one. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But so you want to and I hashtag everything. And the reason I do that, and this kind of ties into the next thing, which is the fan art thing, is because, well, actually, let's do that because it makes it even easier to talk about. So fan art. I have always been baffled by because I've known so many professors that and teachers and things and artists even that will tell you that fan art is a bad thing, and it's not. I think it's actually one of the best things an illustrator can do, and there's reasons for that. First of all, it improves artistic versatility. If you want to work in the animation industry or the comics industry, even you want you're going to be a project worker from contract to contract, project to project. You can't just draw in one style. You've got to learn how to draw in the style of the intellectual property that you are trying to get a job on. And so fan art is perfect for that. I mean, it is absolutely ideal for that because it forces you to do that. So take your characters, draw them in other styles. That's kind of the presentation that I got here because I'm known for Mallory Bash. Right outside of Aw Nuts, Mallory Bash is an animated series concept that I created. And I use these characters all the time for other things. It was a web comic and it has its own story, but I use these characters and I put them in other worlds and I put other characters in their world. I do this because it helps bring eyes to my work. If I post something like this, like the Dragon Ball Z thing, right after Akira Toriyama died, I did a piece that where I added Mallory to some of the characters from Dragon Ball Z. And what this did for me was when I posted it everywhere, I was able to hashtag not just Mallory and all the other characters and all the other concepts that go along with that, like the locations and all that, but also Dragon Ball Z, DBZ, Goku, Vegeta, Piccolo, all the characters that are in it, Akira Toriyama by name. I can hashtag all those things, and it coalesces all of it. So it brings people who like Dragon Ball Z when they do searches on Dragon Ball Z, it brings them to my work as well, if the art's good, right? And so fan art is really, really, really good for a lot of reasons. But I highly, highly recommend you do that. And again, post it absolutely everywhere. And then, of course, if you have characters, and everybody does, if you want to be an artist, I don't think I've ever met an illustrator that wanted to be somebody who just worked on everybody else's projects, right? It's usually because you have some story of your own. If you have a story of your own and you have characters of your own, my suggestion, if you want to get eyes on it, is to create a webcomic. Webtoon.com and Tapas are the two biggest ones for webcomics. But what it does, it's very, very hard to get anybody to look at your work if it's just notes on stuff and character designs and I mean, they'll like it as art, but if you want to get them interested in a like a whole IP, then other than making a pitch Bible, which is good, but also the only people who ever look at that professionally are people who work at studios who take in pitch Bibles so that they can determine whether or not it's an idea worth producing. But if you want to draw a crowd to your work, what you want to do, if you have a story, is build something. They need to see those characters in the context of the story that you've built. They can't just read about the story, right? You don't just want to throw an overview at them because it's hard to get people to read that. And it makes sense, right? But if you create a webcomic somewhere where they can see those characters in that world behaving the way that they do, relating to each other the way that they do, in the context of a plot, that's what brings people in. You've got to have story. And so that's my suggestion on that. And again, like I said, the last note there, post everywhere. Instagram, I'd say Instagram's probably the biggest one for artists. ArtStation is good if you're trying to build a portfolio. That's sort of like um, ArtStation is like the most professional place for artists. As soon as you open up ArtStation, you are going to be like the worst artist on that website. And we've all had that experience because there's so many just amazing artists on there. But post there. Tumblr's a pretty good one. It's not too bad. It's good for bringing some more people to your work. Weirdly enough, DeviantArt is actually still a pretty good resource for that too, to bring more people to your work because they'll start following you and sharing your work on all these other social media things too. But the bigger thing I want to talk about is LinkedIn. Um, we'll get to that. So let's we're going to take a sideline here for just a minute. I actually just added this particular slide right before the meeting because I was like, and there's something that I should probably talk about since I'm talking about that, and I wanted to make sure I filled the time. But so the most important thing, so we're going to talk about what to work on now. If you want to be an illustrator, or you want to be if you want to work in any kind of industry from animation to comics, whatever it happens to be, you can do indie work if you are not professional quality, and there's a lot of great examples of webcomics that did well, even though the artwork isn't like studio quality, we'll say something like that, or craft perfect, whatever you want to call it. But if you want to work on a studio project, or you want to work on something really really big, and you don't just want to be sort of an indie artist, you've got to learn what's called draftsmanship. That is the fundamental term for learning how to draw well. That's what it means. So there's no way around it. You have to learn anatomy. This is like the first massive hurdle that students have to get over. There's plenty of students who go to fine art schools who already know that and accept that they have to learn anatomy if they want to be able to draw humans, right? But that's fine art. The cartoonists and the illustrators and the animators, you sometimes you kind of have to push them a little bit to understand that if you want to draw cartoons, because what a cartoon it's an exaggerated version of real life. If you want to be able to draw cartoons, the note I have here is you can't exaggerate shape, language, and proportions of anatomy that you don't know. You have to know the anatomy. You have to learn what it actually is, the base of it, right? Know the rules before you break them. It's the same concept. You have to know that before you can do anything else. So you've got to learn draftsmanship, and that draftsmanship consists of a lot of things. But to get through the basic parts of it, for the purposes of this video, you're talking about basic underlying shapes, guidelines, and contour lines. Those are the big things, right? And when you're doing those things, what you're doing is you're learning to build up 3D shapes in a 2D space. A lot of beginning illustrators, they sort of think of themselves more as like drawers, I guess. And what they're not really realizing is that if you want to be craft good, you're not just someone drawing on paper. You're not just making doodles. It's not just flat stuff, right? You are a sculptor. In literal terms, you are a sculptor. It's just that your medium is 2D. It might be analog or it might be digital, but your medium is 2D. But you are still building 3D structures. So you've got to learn draftsmanship so you know how to do that. The images you see up in the top right of this particular slide, that's not the whole slide, but those are the examples, the simplest version of a path from learning how to illustrate basic to learning how to illustrate craft perfect. That's the example that I use. Start with really, really basic, simple shapes, because what that does, flat, simple shapes, 2D shapes, and get your hand learning how to sketch properly, where you can lay down multiple lines, but the strokes stay pretty tight, right? That's the ideal way to sketch. You want to keep them as tight as you can, but you want your arm to be as loose as you can make it. And then you use guidelines and contour lines to build up the 3D aspect of that, but taking a square and turning it into a cube, taking a sphere and taking a circle and turning it into a sphere. Taking a triangle, turning it into a pyramid. You get the idea. But those are the things that you want to learn, and that's sort of the fastest, most efficient way to get from basic beginning illustration to now I can actually visualize and intuit the 3D structures, the underlying simple 3D structures, the simple shapes of what it is I'm trying to build up. And so that's why I have the example at the bottom there with Ava. And you can see it starts with these simple, really sketched out shapes. I build all those up. I make sure I know how they fit into one another, how they attach. And then I've got all these contour lines that help me understand the depth of the anatomy that I'm building. And so there's a few different things, a few different versions there. And that one at the end is what I call the doll effect, or the doll technique. And I tell my students, because one of the hardest things to learn when you're illustrating is the joints, right? How those things fit together. So I tell them one of the best ways to get started on that is to think of your character or whatever it is that you're building kind of like an action figure or a doll. Look at the way that those joints attach, because they're hinge joints and they're ball joints, right? They're built that way so that they can move, so that they're articulated like an actual human. So it can really, really help you understand how those pieces fit together. Okay, I want to go ahead and push on a little bit, though I will talk about environments real quick. So, like it or not, if you're a comic illustrator, especially an indie one, you've got to know how to draw everything. Now, some big places, big studios, might have, or big publishers, they might have somebody who does characters and backgrounds, but usually that's reserved for animation, right? So a lot of times when they're looking for an illustrator, especially right now and the way that the economy is currently, they're looking for somebody who can do as much as possible, right? If you can do characters and environments, you're going to do great. So, but the thing about environments is to remember that all the same principles apply to environments as they do to characters, right? Um, shape, language, proportion, guidelines, contour lines, all that stuff. You're doing the same thing. You're just doing it on a bunch of stuff instead of just one character. So all the props, all the environmental pieces, all the elements. What you're doing then is you're taking all those and you're building something new, which is a composition. That's what you don't get with character, right? There's an element of composition to it, I guess. But when you're doing environments, you are dealing with composition. You're taking all the things that you designed and placing them in the context of a scene. And so that's really the only major difference. So we'll go ahead and move on from that because I want to make sure we get through everything in about 25 to 30 minutes. But I wanted to take a minute to tackle how to get your work seen and what the things are that you need to work on if you want to get good enough to work in the even the independent comic book industry. Because I work for Paper Cuts, right? That's what All Nuts was published in, and they want those kinds of artists. Even as it's not like a really small publisher, but it's sort of it's under DC and Marvel, but they still look for those kinds of artists to do that type of work. So that's what you want to focus on. All right. So now we can start talking about me and Max and the sort of the beginnings of the author illustrator relationship. I think it's been a benefit to me that I'm also a writer, and I do. That was my career. That was my minor. I've had things published, so I also understand the world of writing and how stories work. And I also teach that in my animation class. We start with that. We start with the hero's journey and character psychology. We go through the entire hero's journey, not just the way they talk about it in 12 steps narratively, but I break all 17 steps down. I read the book that it's based on, right? The Hero with a Thousand Faces, and I teach it in terms of mythology, not just sort of generic filmmaking and storytelling. Because you need to understand what the underlying structure of all those stories are and why they exist the way that they do. Now, I do the same thing with character psychology. We talk about archetypes, we talk about Jung, we talk about all that stuff. Because if you want to be the absolute best you can possibly be at this craft, you need to know what it's all based on at the bottom of it. And I've always been that kind of person, and I'm that kind of teacher. I want to know, in order for me to truly understand something, I have to get all the way to the bottom of it. And that's how you do it. So that's my method. And this is why I think one of the reasons why me and Max work as well together as we do. So, talking about LinkedIn, every opportunity that I've had, all the good stuff has come from LinkedIn. Now, Max is not the only industry professional, and he's actually not the first industry professional that I made as a connection through LinkedIn. There was a guy named Jeff Wagner. I'm still partners with him. He did a lot of the awesome stuff for me with Mallory Bash. He helped me get the pitch Bible set up, and he set up all the pitch meetings at Nickelodeon and Disney and Cartoon Network and Netflix, and like I mean all of them. And he landed all of them, so it was awesome. But that was one connection that I made, and how that and I'm still, like I said, I'm still friends with him, and I still work with him. We're working on pushing Mallory to pitch for a movie and series right now. So it's a great relationship to have. Now, Max actually did the exact same thing. They both kind of approached me in the same way. And the way this happened was because I posted my work everywhere, including LinkedIn, everything that I did, it made it ubiquitous, right? It would made it unavoidable. They would see it on their feed. And so I made all the connections I could with industry professionals on LinkedIn so that I would show up in their feed. And that happened for Jeff and that happened for Max. So Max saw my work and he said, "Hey, I like the work that you're doing. I like the style that you work in, this whole Mallory Bash stuff. I like the style of that, and I think it could work really well for this cartoon concept that I have." And so now this wasn't on Nuts. This was something else. I've worked on, good God, I think like 7 or 8 different projects with Max over the last 7 or 8 years. It's been a while. But yeah, so On Nuts was one of the somewhat more recent ones, kind of in the middle. But anyway, so he saw that work and he said, "Well, I think this would work really well for what I want to do." So I worked on a few different projects with him. We did a web comic for one, and you can see that on Tapas. It's called Palm Leaf. And what made that particular project unique is I suggested to him. I think I suggested to him. I think it was my idea. I can't remember. That, hey, why don't we do like a little web comic as pitch material? Because it's all pitch material for shows that he wanted to pitch to his bosses at Nickelodeon. And so he thought that was a pretty good idea. So, and he might have come up with it, to be honest. I don't remember. Um, but so that's what we did. And it got really popular in a very short amount of time. I think within like a week, we had over 1,000 subscribers. It was something like that anyway. I know it was a lot. It surprised the hell out of me. But not that I didn't have any faith in the project, but yeah. Anyway, so that happened. And then we just kind of kept rolling with that. We built a friendship, we built a relationship. I'm going to get into that a little bit later. But eventually he had this idea for All Nuts. And when he pitched it to me, I thought it was like, oh, we're getting back to like, this is the kind of cartoon that I grew up on. This is that sort of 90s cartoon appeal. And so that's kind of the direction I took with it. And so we went through the whole process. We got everything set up. But I'll get into that in a minute. So that's how all of that happened. And on LinkedIn, I have a project set up that has him attached to it. So that's one of the nice things about LinkedIn. There's a section you can create for projects. And then so I can put all notes on there, show how long we've been working on it, give details on the project, and then add Max's LinkedIn profile as a contributor to that. So that's pretty cool. All right. So talking about the actual relationship that Max and I have, though, uh, I think it's very, very, very important to build an actual relationship with I mean, you call him a partner, but there's plenty of business relationships that are not like friendships, right? And so I don't think we'll get into this. So building a genuine relationship with your partner is important. That's the idea here. Not just a professional quid pro quo, not just like looking for work or money or something like that. You can do some decent work that way, but in my experience, I've never done great work without having a genuine relationship with the person that I'm working with. So, caring about the projects as if they were yours. And because in some sense they are, right? I mean, this is Max's project, right? He created it. He came up with the characters, he wrote the script, he did all that stuff. But as far as the design work and the visual element of it, like that's all been me. That's what he hired me to do. And so I feel just as much of a connection to the work and the world and the characters and everything that Max does. And he recognizes that. And so we have that sort of shared interest, that shared passion for the project. And that passion wouldn't have developed if it weren't for this third point that I've got, which is artists need to see that they can find themselves in their work. So actual collaboration is invaluable if you want the best out of your writer or artist. This is my favorite thing about working with Max. And what it is when he hires me on to do something, say it's design a character or build a world, it doesn't matter what it is. What he does is he says, I got some ideas, let me throw them at you. Maybe he'll send me some reference images like, hey, I think I want it to kind of look like this and kind of look like that. And so he'll do that. And then he gives me complete freedom to do whatever I want. He trusts me explicitly to he knows that the first thing I send him is going to be at least good enough that he will have lots to work with, and he'll be able to say, I like this, I like this, I like this. Let's skip on that, blah blah blah. And I'm going to talk about that here in a minute, that sort of process. But that's the relationship that we have, and I think I don't think you can get any better than that. The idea that you trust each other, you trust the craft that you trust that each other understands the craft so well that you can just throw notes at each other and you know that they'll get it. And that's a compliment that Max, that I've always loved that Max has given me in the past, which is he said that maybe more than any other artist he's worked with, when he gives me really rough ideas of stuff, I just get it. Like I know what he's after when he sends me references and when he sends me just some short blurbs about what he wants to do. And I think that's the result of being someone who's indulged in pop culture and TV and stories like my entire life, right? I can sort of intuit what he's going for based on other properties that existed and what he wants to do. So that's kind of the relationship. I think that's one of the things that makes our relationship work as well as it does. But as far as the actual process, we'll go through this real quick because then we're going to talk about the sort of the big important stuff about the relationship between the two of us and why it works. But character design is the first thing we're going to talk about. So when we do character design, like the example I have here is Peanut. These are actual files that he and I sent back and forth until we managed to settle on a finalized character design. So Max gives me a quick bio description and some references, right? I set up a series of initial ideations for the character and send them over. So he'll give me some notes, he might send me some reference images, and then I will just draw usually between 5 and 10 quick iterations, quick sketches, and those are going to be the broadest set. Like when I talked about the importance of versatility, this is where it comes in. I'm just doing as many different versions as I can, as many different styles as I can. And then I'll send that to Max, and Max will say, oh, okay, I like this part of number 3. I like this part of number 6. Let's see if we can sort of like combine those things, and we'll throw the rest of the stuff out. And so I'll do that. I'll do another 5 or 10, and then I will send those iterations over. And we just keep doing that until we sort of distill down to the finalized design. And that's kind of what you're seeing in the top right corner. That line art and then that full color right next to it. That was the first finalized version of Peanut. And then it sort of developed over time as I kept drawing Peanut. You can actually watch this when you read the comic. If you look at it carefully, you'll notice that Peanut's character design slowly gets more and more consistent. Things change in the size of his arms and the shape of his head. It's subtle, but it's there until I finally got to a design where I know how to draw him every time. I know how many lines, I know how many points are on his head, all that kind of stuff. So, but that's the process of character design. As far as comics, It's really similar. So Max will send me the script that he's written, and I'll just take it 1 to 5 pages at a time. I'll throw down all the rough sketches. We do all the sketches first. All the rough sketches to get the layout done, and then I'll throw those at him, and he'll say, "Okay, let's make these edits. I like this. I don't like this." And then again, we just kind of bat that back and forth until he's happy with the results, and then we move on to more pages. Once we have all the sketches done, we'll do the same thing with the ink. And usually that's the quicker part because we already kind of know, all the layouts have already been settled on. As long as the brush strokes look good, we're good on ink. That's usually the fastest process. And then we'll go on after that. We'll do the exact same process for finalized color. And so he'll give me notes on what he thinks, how he thinks the colors are looking. The characters are already set up by then because the character designs. But for the environment, he might say, this is supposed to be a little bit more dawn or dusk. Can we push the colors a little bit more blue? Blah, 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 blah. And so it's the same process just with the entire page and not just the characters themselves. So that's a really quick overview of just sort of the process between us. But let's talk more about, because this is what the video is mostly about, is this sort of collaboration effort. Like, what is the relationship between us? Why does it work? How do we allow it to work as well as it does? So it's important to understand that both the writer and the illustrator are artists. I did a presentation before I got hired on at Indiana University because it was my alma mater too. I went to school there and graduated from there. But they invited me back to do a presentation after I did a bunch of stuff for Mallory Bash and was able to go and have it pitched. And so my colleague, who used to be my professor, he's the one that got me the job, and he said the reason that you got this job and that I asked you is because of that presentation that you gave. And this was the thing that got him, this particular note that I'm talking to you about right now. This idea that both the writer and the illustrator are artists. Both need to feel that some part of themselves is going into the work and that they can see it in the end result. Both have chosen a vocation they hope makes them feel like they're putting something meaningful into the world, even if it's as simple as the joy of something, strictly entertaining. The major note is, if you have an idea, if you're the creator, and this is why I like Max, you can't hold the reins so tight that nobody else feels like they're putting any part of themselves into that project. You have to understand that you're working with other artists. If they're hired onto your project, they want to feel like an artist. They want to feel like whatever they're contributing, they're going to be able to see themselves in it. And this is what I love about working with Max. So the images you're seeing on here, this is one of my favorite things. So Max has a lot of connections to artists in the industry. And so what he had been doing is he had been sending the original character designs that I made to all these different artists that work at the studios. And they did their own sort of versions of them, these variants. And we've just been kind of using it as sort of like social media promotion. So we've got artists from all over the place. Some of my favorites, one of the artists here is the art director from Iron Giant, which was really, really cool. And then there's just all these other industry professionals that climbed on board to do these. So it's really, really cool to see. It's the first time I've ever seen my work sort of treated that way. So that's been really, really flattering and awesome. But it works because he understands that I'm an illustrator, that I want to make sure that anything that I put labor into, I'm going to see myself and I'm going to see my work in it. There's some meaning that I've put into it myself. And so he gives me all that leeway. So Max and I respect each other's roles. He's the creator and the writer, and my work is in service to his vision, not my own. I have never had any I don't know, delusions or anything like that otherwise. But you still need that sort of balance, and that's what Max gives me. He understands that I'm the visual artist between us. So if I explain a better way or a more clarifying way to execute something in the illustration or the comic, he listens. Now he might have, of course he's going to have opinions on it. Sometimes he likes it, and sometimes he doesn't. And so we just kind of, like I said, we bounce that back and forth, and ultimately he gets to make those final decisions. But he listens. There's never been a time when I have had suggestions that Max has not listened to them and been actively interested in them. And he's been really, really happy with a lot of them. And sometimes he says, well, I don't think that's going to work. And he'll tell me why, because he might have some idea for something he's going to do in the future with it. And so it's not going to quite jive with the story, right? Those kinds of decisions. So like I said, sometimes he fires back and makes really good points. And sometimes he sees that what I'm doing is working better. And it just, we just bat it back and forth. And that's kind of how we settle. So the takeaway isn't that either of us is like unassailable in our field because, well, the point is that we communicate and we negotiate these things, and we never take it personally when the other person says, not in direct language, but something like, I know that this is your job, but I have an idea that I think would still be better. Like if I say it to him, it might be in the writing, or if he says it to me, it might be in the art itself, right? You can't have, I'll put it this way. Every time I've seen artists and illustrators and writers work together who have, I don't know, we'll say large prides. If their pride, it's easy to let pride get in the way when you're dealing with like two creatives who are trying their damnedest to feel like the project is theirs. That doesn't work well. It delays everything, right? You've got to be able to sit back and understand that this is not just your project. And me and Max, we get along really, really well when it comes to that stuff. I cannot think of a single time where there has been like a like an irresolvable conflict between because either one of us was concerned that our voice wasn't being heard, right? We've never, ever, ever in all the years we've worked together, ever had that problem. Because we understand each other that way. Like he sends me the information, I do my best to design it. He gives me notes, I give him feedback. I say I think this might be better. He either accepts or rejects it. And then ultimately, because this particular project is he's the creator and the writer. Then like I said, he gets to make those final decisions. Like I said, ultimately on us is Max's creation. He'll have the final word on any decision, and I've never put him in a situation where he feels like he has to assert that fact. I understand that about this project. But the more and more we work on it, it seems like it just sort of naturally becomes like a shared thing. Like we both do so much work on it all the time. We like I've never felt like the lesser of the two people working on this project. And he's never made me feel that way. And I think that's why building that relationship is so important. He's the creator, and that does come with certain privileges that we'd all want in his position if it was something that we came up with ourselves. So that's the important thing to remember if you're sort of for lack of better words, the secondary creator or illustrator or whatever it is on that project. If it was something that you wanted to work on, you would want other people to understand that too. It's like, I want to listen to all the suggestions because some of them are going to be better than anything that I could come up with. But I do still want to be able to have the final word on what gets done with like Mallory Bash or something like that. So there's that balance that you got to strike. But like I said, he's never turned down an opportunity to review and discuss whatever suggestions I might have. Every single time he's been willing to hear them out. So I absolutely love that about Max. I think I'm very, very lucky that Max has been sort of like my first real deep dive into an industry with a professional who's already working there. Jeff's been great, but he and I don't do a lot of this kind of collaborative work. I'm kind of the creator and the designer and all that stuff, and then Jeff helps me make the connections to pitch those ideas and those kinds of things. But I have that relationship more with Max as two like really like structured professional artists, and so that's what's been really really nice about it. Like I said, I've never found a relationship built solely on business to be particularly rewarding or engaging. I have never had much of an interest in doing things just for like money or whatever it happens to be. I want to feel like, and I think a lot of artists are this way. We want to feel like we're creating something that is meaningful. And like I said, even if it's just making kids laugh or something like that, like if you've never experienced that, like reading something you've drawn or written in front of a bunch of kids and they're just going, no pun intended, nuts over it, um, it's the best feeling in the world. So like you can't diminish that, right? But sometimes you want to do something that's like philosophically meaningful or something like that. That tends to be more where my personal work sort of goes into it. But like I said, I built a genuine friendship with Max, and when we do chat on the phone or Zoom or whatever, we'll talk for I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 minutes about whatever he called to talk about, something to do with the comic or something we're working on. But then we'll talk for like sometimes I think the longest conversation we had might have been for like 2 hours or something. We were talking about anything and everything else. Like we're friends. We're not just artists working on a project. And I think that is a good goal to have if you want to do something really, really good. If you want to feel like the work that you're doing has meaning, you need to build a relationship, like a real relationship with the people that you're working with. Like I said, we have a strong sense of who each other are as people because we're friends. And that makes it easier to intuit each other's visions. If you want to get really, really efficient at the project that you and other artists are working on, get to know them as people. Because if you get to know them as people, like that's what the point of the note is, once you understand that, you don't have to ask as many questions about what they're thinking. You start to understand kind of where they're coming from and what their goals are. And you can start to intuit it before they even have to say anything. I think this is one of the reasons that Max likes working with me is because I'm able to do that. I'm able to in my head say, okay, I think I know exactly what you're going for here. And I can send him ideas immediately that are all at least relatively close to it. And then he gets to sort them out. But that's the idea. What I'm getting at with that is I don't think you can create something iconic without that kind of relationship. You can think about projects where artists have talked about it, like Friends is a great example of that, the TV show Friends. Anytime you hear those actors talking about working on that show, like the minute they sat down, the first time they sat down to read a script, it clicked. Like they just fit together perfectly right off the bat. And they became actual friends, right? And you can see that in the chemistry they have in the show. It comes across. That genuineness comes across. And that genuineness is what builds authenticity in the work that you're creating. And so that's why building a real relationship is so important. Not just a business relationship, but a real, like a friendship with these people. Um, like I said, we can be much more efficient in our collaboration when we know each other as people. And like I said, Max has said that I need very little distraction before I just get it. I know I keep talking about that, but that compliment really stuck with me. So it's been really, really cool to have such an easy, fast, simple, efficient relationship with Max. And to feel like I have a friend and not just somebody who needs me to do artwork for ideas that he has. All right. So building on that relationship, I went to Lightbox. This is just sort of or building a relationship. This is a sort of a side note to give you an idea of how this worked and how fast it was. Um, I went to Lightbox last year in 2024 in November. No, I'm sorry, October. It was on my birthday weekend. And Max let me stay in his apartment to help me save money on the trip. Well, before that, I know we had met face to face once. We might have met twice. I can't remember. But either way, I flew out to Los Angeles and he let me stay in his apartment for 3 days. And he wasn't even going to be there. He had to be in Chicago that weekend. So I had this guy's apartment by myself for 3 days, and he trusted me enough that he was completely out of town, right, that entire time. And man, that I was wildly appreciative and somewhat baffled by that. But I was a Boy Scout growing up, so when I was there, I was like, okay, this place is going to be cleaner than when I got here, which was challenging because he's a pretty clean guy. But I made sure to pick up after myself and all that stuff. But it's because when I saw that trust existed between me and him, the most important thing to me was to validate that, to verify that for him. Like he can leave me alone in his apartment, only ever meeting me face to face once or twice, and and everything will go great, right? Um, but yeah, so that was just to give you an example of like if you build a real relationship, a real friendship with these people that you're working on a project with, they'll do awesome stuff for you like that. I mean, no joke, Max, when he did that, probably saved me about $600 or $700 because he didn't even charge me for anything. Like I was able to stay there for free, so that was really, really cool, and I've always been wildly appreciative of that. Um, that's what I got here. So making some, we're almost done. Making something great requires a connection to humanity. It requires a connection to the human condition, and that's kind of maybe the conclusion of the thesis that I've been building up through this whole presentation, through building a friendship with the people that you're working with, and through understanding story and character at the bottom of things. Right, it all builds up to this. You understand and have a connection to actual people and what it's like to actually live life. But even in cartoons and comics, those things still need to be relatable, and so you still need to have that. I know that one of the things that I've talked about with students a lot, one of my sort of gripes about modern storytelling, and especially with comedy and sitcoms and things like that, is that it seems like when you're watching it or you're listening to it or you're reading it, the writing feels like it's been experienced by proxy. What I mean by that is it feels like the writing is coming from writers who don't have actual experience doing things, but are basing it on characters and TV shows that they grew up with. And so what I call it the simulacrum effect, right? It's like a copy of a copy of a copy thing. And so you need to if you want to be really, really good at this, you have to have experience, like actual life experience, so that you know what it's like to be in that situation and not just from characters who have been in that situation, right? And so you want to try to avoid that as much as you can. It's perfectly fine to have inspirations for things. I have all kinds of inspirations. I talked about Friends. That was an inspiration for the way I write. So was Roseanne. So was The Simpsons. That sort of down to earth vibe that you get from watching those shows. That's how Mallory's written. But that's how you engage people, is what I mean. And so doing that in the writing and doing that in the relationship that you're trying to build professionally, it that authenticity comes through. The best stories come from direct experience, not just the proxy or the mimicry of entertainment that you love. That's the sort of overlying note there. Creative collaboration is best when it bears a shared experience of humanity. You can't get that in a business acquaintance. If all you have are business acquaintances, the only thing you'll ever know how to write are business acquaintances, right? You have to have friends, you have to have family, you have to have experiences. That's storytelling, right? It's people telling stories because they have experience. I guess the major idea is that last note there is you've got to connect genuinely to your partners. Meaningful craft storytelling it's built on genuine collaboration. That's what you've got to do. That's what you've got to um, aspire toward. And it's hard as an illustrator, I'll tell you that, because while I'm working on all this stuff, I'm simultaneously like I have to have that balance between it's like the high school balance, right? How much do I do my homework and how much do I go out and do stuff with friends? That never goes away if you're an artist. It's like I have to work because that's the point, right? I'm trying to tell stories and that's what I want to do with my life. And that's where all the meaning is and all the stuff that I have to offer the world. But I can't do that unless I know what the world is like, that I have experiences. Like you have to have those things. So that's the sort of the hard balance. But that's what you're doing if you're trying to tell a story is you are trying to relate to people. You're trying to communicate something to an audience. And the best way to do that is to have real life experience and also to have genuine friendships with people so that you have access to the human condition at its most genuine, at its most authentic. And that's all I've got. That is the entire presentation. I want to thank everybody at the Storytellers Shelf podcast for giving me the opportunity to do something like this. This is I've done a podcast interview once before, but this is kind of a first as far as basically just kind of doing a lecture and being sort of a presenter on my experience working in this industry and working with Max and those kinds of things. So again, thank you very very much, and good luck.